Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study of the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Ezra chapter 7 and 8. I'm going to get right in it and then give you the backstory and explain it as we uh, do so in the text itself. And because Ezra is a very interesting person, and so let's get right into it. Let's bring it out of the text here. All right. Uh, Chapter 7, verse 1 says, after these events, now the event that he's referring to, of course, is the opposition that they endured from the people of the land, some of the Assyrians, actually. Um, and just kind of a note that this probably took a few years for them to resolve. In other words, remember when they began building the temple, uh, some of the remnants of the Assyrian people came and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" First, they came with a ruse that said, "Hey, let us build with you. We serve the same God." They were lying. When they rejected, then they tried to intimidate them, and then they wrote this letter to um, Artaxerxes, okay, which at first he wrote a letter stopping the building. And then they kind of went over his head to, excuse me, Darius, who found a letter from Cyrus. And then after these events, during the reign of King Artaxerxes of Persia, Ezra, um, Sariah's son, Azariah's son, Hilkiah's son, Shalomon's son, Zodok's son, Ahitub's son, Amariah's son, Azariah's son, Merioth's son, um, Zeriah's son, um, Uzziah's son, Boki's son, Abib, Ab, Abishu's son, Phinehas' son, Eleazar's son, Aaron the chief priest's son, came up from Babylon. Now this genealogy established that Ezra qualified as a high priest. Okay, he is from the direct line of Aaron. Now, one of the kind of quick thing about genealogies, as you can see here, is that not all genealogies, in a sense, are as accurate. In other words, they give you the gist of it. So if you go all the way from um, Ezra all the way back to Aaron, it should have been a lot longer, but they give you the gist of it too. These are just kind of the gist, not. But anyway, he is able to prove that he is of the descendant of Aaron itself, which means he could be a high priest. Okay, so verse 6 says, he came up from Babylon. He was a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses, which Yahweh, the God of Israel, had given. And then says the king had granted him everything he requested because the hand of Yahweh, his God, was on him. Now, one of the Ezra's greatest attributes was he was a scribe, and the scribe was one who was able and skilled to write the law. So, would you see different copies of the law? Ezra would write them. He also wrote the history. As we can see, his probably this letter here. He probably wrote First and Second Chronicles, First and Second Kings. Now, when you read them, however, some of the difficulties with some of these books is that you will see a phrase that would say, that such and such or a statue or something is here until this day. And then, so Ezra couldn't have been around. Remember, he is a post-exile person. So 70 years after the destruction, and remember, it was a complete destruction of Israel, the temple. So when the writers were writing some of these things and they were saying that it was here to this day, you see that in Judges. Some people even suggest and believe that Ezra can wrote pretty much all of the Old Testament. I've seen some suggestions, even going so far back as Joshua. Because you remember, a lot of these Old Testament books did not have really the writers or authors named. Translators ascribed some of the names. So Samuel, for example, if you think about 1st and 2nd Samuel, like 2nd Samuel couldn't have been written by Samuel. Samuel was dead before David ascended to the king, and 2nd Samuel was completely the reign of David, as king. So those names in a sense were given by translators. But it is also possible that some of the, especially when you get to 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, that some of the stories or the narrative were written at different times and sort of spliced together. And especially we can see that in 2nd Chronicles, when you see the last chapter, which is you see the destruction of Jerusalem, and then you see the decree of Cyrus. Now, again, it's believed that Ezra could have written that. But again, we're not sure because it doesn't say that for sure. But a scribe would also teach. He was a teacher of the law. And notice he said he was skilled in that. Now, that's why when you would come to Jesus' day, the scribes should have been skilled. What made their sin so great is that they knew who Jesus was, but they rejected him. They wasn't confused, they knew. And also, if you remember, Herod called them and said, hey, we heard that this, the Messiah was born. And they were able to, by the scriptures, okay, they were able to say, yeah, he was born in Bethlehem. All right. Verse 7 says, some of the Israelite priests, Levite singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants accompanied him to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month. During the 7th year of the king, he began his journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the month and arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month, since the gracious hand of his God was on him. So about a 4 to 5 month journey. They didn't have cars and airplanes and trains. So usually horseback carriage like that. Verse 10. Now Ezra determined in his heart to study the law of God, obey it, and teach its statutes and ordinance in Israel. Would to God all pastors and teachers would do this. Determined to, in his heart, to study the law of God, to study the word of God. Now, this was also important because remember, he's teaching a new generation, a post-exile generation, God's law. And you would see, we will see later some of the challenges that they would have with that. You have to remember that not a lot of people, that during the 70-year exile, you didn't even have synagogues. The synagogues would not come until a few hundred years after this point, during what's called the intertestament period between Malachi and Matthew. That's when the rise of the synagogue came. But during the 70 years, they weren't studying God's word. They didn't have it. They were, again, exiled in Babylon among Gentiles. So, and it says here that one of the things he would do is to teach the law of God. Now, he had been studying this during the time of the exile. Okay, verse 11 says, "This is the text that the king Artaxerxes gave to Ezra the priest, the scribe, and an expert in matters of the law and commandments and statutes of Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, an expert in the law of God of heaven." Okay, Now remember, Artaxerxes wasn't at first the greatest king, but okay, he came around, looked like. It says, greetings, I issue a decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including their priests, Levites, who want to go to Jerusalem, may go with you. You are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to evaluate Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your possession. Now, this is by the way, this is amazing from the perspective of, now keep this in mind, they don't have to do that. Most people, when you're conquered, they didn't give you a lot of this freedom. Okay, in fact, a lot of times they didn't want you to have this freedom. They wanted you to be kind of assimilated into their culture. So God's hand was on the king. Verse 15, you ought also to bring the silver and the gold the king and his counselors have willingly given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem, and all the silver and gold you received throughout the province of Babylon, together with the freewill offerings given by the people and the priests to the house of their God in Jerusalem. Then you are to buy with this money as many bulls, rams, lambs as needed, along with their grain and drink offerings, and offer them on the altar at the house of your God in Jerusalem. You may also do whatever seems best to you and your brothers. With the rest of the silver and gold, according to the will of your God, you must deliver to the God of Israel. You must deliver to the God of Israel. The God of Jerusalem, all the articles given to you for the service of your house of your God. You may use the royal treasury to pay for anything that is needed for the house of your God. King Artaxerxes issued the decree to all the treasures in the regions west of the Euphrates River. Remember, these are the people that were causing the uprising. Whenever Ezra the priest, an expert of the law of the God of heaven, asks of you, must be provided promptly up to 7,500 pounds of silver, 500 bushels of wheat, 500 gallons of wine, 550 gallons of oil, and salt without limit. Whatever is commanded by the God of heaven must be done willingly for the house of the God of heaven, so that wrath may not fall on the realm of the king of his sons. Kind of interesting that he's kind of cognitive of, again, God and the God of wrath. Verse 24, be advised that tribute, duty, and land tax must not be imposed on any priests, Levites, singers, doorkeepers, temples, servants, and other servants of the house of God. Now, one quick note here too is that notice that in very different lands and customs, the idea of the religious land and buildings are tax-free. So not only we in America do that, but this goes way back thousands of years. Okay, verse 25. And you, Ezra, according to God's wisdom that you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to judge all the people in the regions west of the Euphrates, who know the laws of your God, and to teach anyone who does not know them. Anyone who does not keep the law of your God and the law of the king, let a fair judgment be executed against him, whether death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. Praise Yahweh, the God of our fathers, who has put it in your heart of the king's mind to glorify the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, and who has shown favor to me, before the king, his counselors, and all his powerful officers. So I took courage because I was strengthened by Yahweh my God. I gathered the Israelites leaders to return with me. It's kind of astounding. Now remember, Artaxerxes, first of all, he had written the letter and sort of was a rat. Okay. But anyway, chapter 8, but you see God's hand upon the king. You see God's hand upon the king. All right. I'm going to kind of breathe through these genealogies here in chapter 8, verse 1. I'm going to breeze through them. It says, these are the family leaders and genealogy records of those who returned with me from Babylon during the reign of King Artaxerxes. And then as you can see, all these kings here and the different men that came with him. These people are the ones that came with Babylon himself. Now, verse 15, I'm going to pick it up at verse 15. He says, "And I gathered them at the river that flows at Heva, and we camped there for 3 days. I searched among the people and priests, but found no Levites there. Then I summoned the leaders, Eleazar, Amar, Shimei, Letha, Jerub, Edith, Nathan, Zechariah, and Misham, as well as the teachers of Jerub and Nelab. I sent them to Iddo, the leader of Casaphia, with the messengers for him and his brothers, the temple servants of Casaphia, that they should bring us ministers for the house of God, since the gracious hand of our God was upon us. They brought us Sherebiah, the man of insight, from the descendants of Mahiah, the descendants of the Levite, son of Israel, along with his sons and brothers, 18 men, plus Hashabiah, along with Joshua from the descendants of Mariah and his brothers and their sons, 20 men. They were 220 of the temple's servants who had been appointed by David, the leaders for the work of Levites. All were identified by name. And verse 21, I proclaim a fast by Ahava River, so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for safety in journey for us, our children, and all of our possession. Now, I want you to notice something. One of the main purpose of a fast, I'm not going to get into it because a lot of people think fasting does something. But notice, here's the biblical definition of what a fast is: to humble yourself while you seek God. Okay? It doesn't impart spirituality. It doesn't. A lot of people fast thinking they're going to grow spiritually and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't. It's just simply a humbling. That's all. Verse 22. I did this because I was ashamed to ask the king for infantry and cavalry to protect us from the enemies during the journey, since we had told him the hand of our God is gracious to all who seek him, but his great anger is against all who abandon him. So we fasted and pleaded with our God about this, and he granted our request. Now let me say this. It's kind of interesting where he says that they were ashamed to ask the king, since they had kind of declared God's hand was upon him. Well, keep this in mind. If you seek to do this, the hand of God and his purpose was on them. So don't be presumptuous to think, if I do this, then God's going to grant my request. He may or may not. Verse 24. I selected 12 of the leaders of the leading priests, along with Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their brothers. I weighed out to them the silver, gold, and articles, the contribution for the house of God, that the king, his counselors, and leaders, and all the Israelites who were present had offered. I weighed out to them 24 tons of silver articles, weighing 7,500 pounds, 7,500 pounds of gold, 20 gold bowls worth of 1,000 gold coins, and 2 articles of fine gleaming bronze, as valuable as gold. Then I said to them, you are holy to the Lord, and the articles are holy, means set apart. The term holy simply means to be set apart exclusively for God's use and purpose. The silver and the gold are freewill offerings to the Lord God, your fathers. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the Lord's house before the leading priests, Levites, and heads of the Israelite families in Jerusalem. So the priests and Levites took charge of the silver and the gold and the articles that had been weighed out to bring them to the house of our God in Jerusalem. Verse 31 says, so we set out from Ahava River on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. We were strengthened by our God, and he protected us from the power of the enemy and from ambush along the way. Now, you can see why they were, one, concerned and afraid, because one, You can get jacked, carjacked, not carjacked, but chariot jacked. You can get robbed, raped. Women could get raped. A lot of things because there was no patrol along these open roads here. And so that's why he was ashamed to ask for a military escort. He said, but God provided for us. Verse 32. So we arrived at Jerusalem and rested there for 3 days. On the fourth day, the silver, the gold articles were weighed out to the house of our God into the care of Miramoth, the priest, son of Uriah. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with us. The Levites, Josaphat, said, son of Joshua, and Noadiah, son of Benu, were also with us. Everything was verified by numbers and weighed out, and the total weight was recorded at that time. The exiles who had returned from the captivity, offering burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all of Israel, 96 rams, 76 lambs, along with the 12 male goats as the sin offering. All this was the burnt offering for the Lord. They also delivered the king's edicts and the warrior satraps and the governors of the regions west of the Euphrates, so that they would support the people in the house of God. Now, notice this extremely large kingdom, Mede and Persians. They would break it down into regions, and that's why they were called satraps and all these different rulers, which is why they were able to get a temporary halt until they were able to go all the way up to the very top kings, beginning with Cyrus, and then at the time, Darius. And then for the region here, what's his name again? Let me go back here, guys, because I'm butcher his name all along here. All right. Artaxerxes. Okay, sorry again that I keep butchering the names of these people. My brain sometimes is not connecting when I'm reading them. I have to stop and really think. So I'm rushing through, and of course butcher the name. So again, he's there. Actually, the temple, remember, is already built. Ezra's purpose is to, again, establish the true worship according to the law of Moses. He is to teach the people the law of Moses so that they can conduct themselves according to the law of Moses. So, we're going to get into, next time, mixed marriages. It's God against mixed marriage. And I am doing a play on the words, but don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. As always, I welcome your thoughts, your opinions. All comments are welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next study.